Estamos contentos de recibir como profesor invitado al doctor Thomas Weber de la Universidad de Aberdeen en Escocia, una de las autoridades más importantes en el campo de los estudios de Alemania nazi, particularmente de Hitler. Hi Thomas, good to have you with us in this important seminar. I would like to ask you, the first question is, tell us about your professional trajectory. In which university you study, where have you been teaching, and what is your current position?
Thank you for having me. My academic life started as a student initially in Germany. I studied for 3 years at the University of Münster, but then before completing my studies I went to England, to Oxford, where I stayed on for my degrees and then for my PhD. And I, at that point, was already working on early 20th century European history. I was already asking the broader questions about politicization, radicalization, and that are very much connected to what I'm working on today, but through slightly different topics. And then I also worked on a collection of Holocaust photography from the Łódź Ghetto, where this new collection, then new collection of about 6,000 new photographs from the Łódź Ghetto had appeared, and the people who had bought them had asked whether I could help them to make sense of them. So that was I guess my entry into working on the Holocaust on a more professional fashion. And but then after that, or after writing my first two books, I started to work on Hitler. Initially, I thought I would have never thought I would be drawn to Hitler because there are just so many books on Hitler. But then I realized that all these explanations on how Hitler can become, how someone like Hitler could become radical, how it could become possible, they hadn't really been answered in all these books, or not answered persuasively in all these books. And in addition to that, I also found that people were not paying quite enough attention anymore to kind of the top leaders, as once had been the case, for perfectly understandable reason, because of course initially after the Second World War there had been far too much focus on just the top leaders. And this was kind of very in an apologetic fashion, and if this was all just Hitler's fault, then it was no one's fault. But I guess by the 1990s, I think things had gone very much to the other extreme, and where it was starting to become kind of unclear what the role of these top leaders were. And I think it was also in that context that I was starting to be drawn to it, that I really wanted to understand better the interaction between Germans and Europeans in general on the one hand, and Hitler on the other. Okay, and I forgot to say that that actually also along the way I had a number of one-year posts on both sides of the Atlantic, in Glasgow, in the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, in Chicago, in the University of Pennsylvania, and before I got a position at the University of Aberdeen, where I'm now Professor of History and International Affairs, and in between I also spent 3.5 years at Harvard.
Okay, and taking into consideration your important book about Hitler, explaining how he became so radicalized and with his views as a Nazi, the idea is, what is the relevance of your book for today, where we live in a very complex world, and there are many, we are seeing nationalism and reactions against globalization. What would you say that is the relevance of your topic to understand the contemporary scene?
I would say the book is more relevant than when I first embarked on it. Initially I would have said it's important to understand Hitler because, for instance, in order to understand the world that he created, in the sense that if we want to understand the world today, we of course have got to understand the origins of how that was being created. So that would be true for any historical topic, but particularly for a topic like Hitler. But now, with the rise of the kind of a new era of strongman, with the rise of populism of both of the extreme left and of the extreme right, right across the world, there's far more relevance. I don't necessarily always think that these direct comparisons, be they Trump-Hitler comparisons or whatever, are particularly useful, but if we widen the scope, if we look, for instance, at the conditions under which these strongmen and Hitler can grow, both in terms of the condition that makes it first possible, but also how people respond to that, then I think this becomes far more relevant. I think the parallel here is that in a moment of a rise of anti-globalism and a huge crisis of globalization, that the conditions are being created for this kind of populist era, and with the populist era, the emergence of strongmen, and in the process, it is then the destruction of the fabric of liberal democracy, of a turning of a politics of adversaries into politics of enemies, that is kind of the scary thing. And in that sense, we might also be less worried about Donald Trump or any particular leader, but rather what might come after them. Another possible lesson from that is that the language of populism or of demagoguery is surprisingly similar across different populists and demagogues, but you normally only realize in hindsight with what kind of demagogue or populist you have ended up with, and you only know in hindsight whether people were entirely sincere in what they were saying, or whether this was rhetoric. So in that sense, and I could go on and on this particular theme, the lesson really here is how to defend liberal democracy and how to strengthen liberal democracy before it's too late, because we already see, even if we don't see Hitler, we already see a lot of the conditions that made the emergence of Hitler in the 1920s possible.
Okay, thank you very much.